HTPC youtube.com watch A female billionaire meets a single father during dinner, and her next move stuns everyone. The restaurant was called Lumiere, and everything inside it was designed to make ordinary people feel small. Crystal chandeliers hung low over white-clothed tables. Waiters moved like shadows. The guests, investors, executives, women draped in jewelry that cost more than most people's homes, spoke in the practiced hush of people who had never once worried about a bill. Vivian Hart arrived at 7:04 p.m., 6-year-old Noah's hand in hers, camera crews already positioned near the entrance. She was dressed in charcoal silk hair pinned back with surgical precision. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman in complete control. But Noah stopped walking. In a corner of the restaurant, tucked away from the chandeliers, from the cameras, from the careful choreography of wealth, sat a man in a faded button-down shirt, quietly cutting a little girl's food into small, careful pieces. I was saying something that made her laugh. Not a polished laugh. A real one. Noah stared, and something in his face shifted, a recognition of something he had never been given a name for. That was the moment everything changed. No one in the room knew it yet. If you're new here, stories like this one are what we do. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's get into it. Vivian Hart did not do anything by accident. The reservation at Lumiere had been made 6 weeks in advance. The guest list: 3 senior investors, 2 financial journalists, 1 lifestyle editor from a magazine that reached 4 million readers, had been curated by her PR team over the course of 2 weeks. Even Noah's outfit had been selected the night before: a small navy blazer, dark trousers, leather shoes that pinched his toes but photographed well. The goal was simple. The board had been whispering for months that Vivian was too cold, too mechanical, too focused on quarterly returns to be a sustainable face for Hartwell Group. Richard Kane, her chief operating officer, had reportedly told 2 board members over golf that a company led by a woman who hadn't smiled in public since 2019 was a liability in the current market. So tonight was a performance, a carefully staged one. What Vivian had not staged was Noah stopping in the middle of the restaurant and refusing to move. She had built Hartwell Group from a mid-sized logistics firm into a billion-dollar conglomerate over the course of 9 years. She had closed deals in 4 languages, restructured a failing subsidiary in under 90 days, and once sat across from a man who threatened her with litigation for 6 hours without blinking. She was not a woman who lost control of situations, but she had never fully figured out her son. Noah was 6 years old, and almost entirely a mystery to her. He was quiet in the way that made adults nervous, not shy, but watchful. He noticed things. He had once told his nanny that the man who drove them to the airport looked like he needed a sandwich and someone to talk to. He had been 4 years old at the time. His father had left when Noah was 18 months old. No dramatic argument. No warning. Just a note on the kitchen counter that said he wasn't built for this kind of life, and then he was gone. Vivian had responded the way she responded to every crisis she absorbed. It reorganized around it and kept moving. She hired the best nanny she could find, enrolled Noah in the best programs, made sure he had everything a child could need. What she had not known how to give him was her time. Or herself. Caleb Moore had not planned to be at Lumiere that night. He had planned to be at Rosa's, a diner 12 blocks away, where the booths were cracked, and the pie was excellent, and nobody looked at you twice if your jacket was 2 seasons old. That was where he and Sophie usually celebrated things, small things, the kind that only mattered to the 2 of them. Sophie had won the school storytelling competition 3 weeks ago. She had stood in front of her entire 2nd grade class and told a story she'd made up herself about a girl who could talk to old buildings and learn their secrets. Her teacher had called it remarkable. Sophie had called it just something I thought of. The night she won, she handed Caleb a drawing. She'd made crayon on yellow construction paper, slightly lopsided of the two of them, sitting at a table with a chandelier overhead. At the bottom, in her careful, oversized handwriting, she had written, "I want to have dinner with Daddy at the restaurant, with the golden lights, like in a story." Caleb had recognized it immediately. Sophie had seen Lumiere once through the window of his delivery van when he was dropping off a catering order 2 months ago. She had pressed her face against the glass and said it looked like somewhere a princess would eat. He had spent the next 2 weeks picking up extra shifts. He had counted the money 3 times. He had called Lumiere and asked for their least expensive table on a Friday evening, and the woman on the phone had been kind enough not to make him feel the way the price made him feel. What he had not anticipated was the new front-of-house staff member who, confused by a last-minute seating rearrangement, led them past the casual dining section near the entrance and directly into the main room. The room with the white tablecloths and the crystal and the guests who wore watches that cost more than his car. By the time Caleb realized the mistake, Sophie was already seated. Her eyes were wide and bright. She was looking at the chandelier the way she had looked at it through the van window, like it was something out of the story she had written. He didn't have the heart to move her. Noah saw them from across the room. He had been following his mother toward the private dining area, a glassed-in space at the back of the restaurant, separated from the main floor by a frosted partition, when something made him stop. Later, he would not be able to explain it clearly. He would only say that the man was cutting the little girl's food, and she was laughing, and it looked like something from a different world than the one he lived in. He pulled his mother's hand. "Mom," Vivian was scanning the room for the journalists. "In a minute, Noah." "Mom." He pulled harder. "I want to sit over there." She looked down at him, then followed his gaze to the corner table. The man in the faded shirt. The little girl with the gap-toothed smile. The modest table that did not belong in this section of the restaurant, and that everyone near it was pretending not to notice. "That's not our table, sweetheart." "I know. I still want to sit there." The restaurant manager appeared at Vivian's elbow, smooth and quiet. "Ms. Hart, your guests are already in the private room. If you'd like to—" "Who are they?" Noah asked. He was still looking at the corner table. "I don't know," Vivian said. "The little girl is laughing," Noah said. "Like really laughing. Not like at my birthday party." Vivian looked at her son. His birthday party had cost $14,000. There had been a magician, a custom cake, 12 children from his school, and their carefully dressed parents. Vivian had been there for 40 minutes before a call from Singapore pulled her away. Something moved behind her sternum, small and sharp. The manager was still hovering. "Ms. Hart, I'd gently suggest that particular table is perhaps not aligned with the caliber of this evening's—" "Bring our settings over," Vivian said. The manager blinked. "I beg your pardon. The settings from this private room. The food, the drinks, whatever was arranged. Bring it to that table." She looked at him steadily. "All of it." "Ms. The investors are already—" "Then they can join us there, or they can eat alone." She straightened her jacket. "That's not a difficult choice." The manager opened his mouth, closed it. Vivian took Noah's hand and walked toward the corner of the room, toward the man who didn't belong here any more than she suddenly wanted to, toward the little girl who was still laughing at something her father had said. The main dining room went quiet in the specific way that expensive rooms go quiet when something unexpected has happened, a silence made of money and surprise and the soft friction of people turning in their seats to look. Vivian Hart, in charcoal silk, sat down at a table that cost $40 a head in a restaurant that cost $400. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had no idea what was going to happen next. Caleb's first instinct was to stand up, not out of respect, out of panic. The woman sitting down across from him was recognizable in the way that very few people were recognizable, not from personal acquaintance, but from the kind of sustained public presence that meant her face had appeared on the covers of magazines stacked in the waiting rooms of the offices he repaired wiring in. Vivian Hart. Hartwell Group. He had once fixed a blown fuse in the basement of one of her company's warehouses and spent the whole afternoon beneath a framed portrait of her shaking hands with the governor. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I think there's been some confusion with the seating. We weren't supposed to be in this section. I can ask the staff to move us." "Please don't," Vivian said. She was looking at Sophie, who was looking back at her with the frank, unguarded curiosity that 7-year-olds deploy without mercy. "My son wanted to sit here." Noah had already climbed into the chair next to Sophie. He pointed at her bread roll. "Is that good?" Sophie considered the question seriously. "It's very buttery," she said. "Do you like butter?" "I like a lot of butter," Noah said. Sophie pushed the bread basket toward him. "Then you can have mine. I already had 2. Caleb watched this exchange and felt the specific vertigo of a situation that was moving faster than his ability to assess it. He looked at Vivian. She was watching the children with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not warmth exactly, but something close to it. The way warmth looks when it's been packed away for a long time and is only just remembering its own shape. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Caleb Moore, and that's Sophie." "Vivian," she said, and did not add her last name, which he found oddly considerate. "And Noah." "I know who you are," he said. She looked at him directly for the first time. Most people say that, and then immediately want something. "I don't want anything," he said. "I just want to finish dinner without my daughter noticing that people are staring at us." Vivian glanced around the room. She had been so focused on the logistics of the decision she'd just made, the investors, the manager's face, the cameras near the entrance, that she had briefly forgotten what it would look like from the outside. Now she saw it clearly. Half the dining room was watching them. A woman 2 tables over had her phone raised at an angle that suggested she thought she was being subtle. "They're staring at me," Vivian said. "Not you, with respect," Caleb said quietly. "I don't think Sophie knows the difference." The food arrived in stages, transferred from the private room, by waiters who managed to convey their disapproval entirely through posture. A junior server took their orders. When Caleb asked for the prix-fixe menu and quietly pointed to the least expensive option, the server's expression shifted in a way that was not quite contempt, but was close enough to sting. Sophie was describing her winning story to Noah in elaborate detail, using her hands to indicate the height of the imaginary buildings and the approximate size of their imaginary secrets. Noah was listening with his whole body, the way children listen when they are genuinely interested rather than merely polite. Caleb was watching them when he heard it. "It's a nice gesture." The voice came from a nearby table, a woman in her 50s, pearl earrings, the particular confidence of someone who had never once lowered her voice in public. Margaret Bell. Very on brand for this moment in her press cycle. The working-class charity dinner. Get a photo, make the front page of the lifestyle section. She paused to sip her wine. Though I'll say she could have at least found someone more presentable. The woman across from her laughed softly. Caleb looked down at his plate. He had learned a long time ago that the most effective response to this kind of thing was no response at all. He had learned it in waiting rooms in the lobbies of buildings where he'd come to fix something and been directed immediately to the service entrance in the years after the army, when the life he'd built had slowly and then very quickly fallen apart, and he'd had to rebuild it smaller piece by piece without complaint. I was good at stillness. It was almost a skill. But Sophie had heard. She put down her fork. She turned in her chair and looked at Margaret Bell with the clear, uncalculated directness that adults spend their whole lives either cultivating or losing. "My dad isn't charity," she said. The table near them went quiet. "My dad fixed Mrs. Patterson's heater when it broke in January, and she's 81, and he didn't charge her anything. And when the lights went out on our whole street last winter, he was the one who went outside at 2 in the morning and figured out what was wrong. And he has never not once left when things got hard." She picked up her fork again and returned to her food with the composure of someone who had said what needed to be said and saw no reason to belabor the point. Noah looked at Sophie, then at Margaret Bell, then at Caleb. "She's right," Noah said with the solidity of a 6-year-old who has just decided something important. "You make me feel safer than anyone in the suits at my mom's house." The silence that followed was the kind that costs something. Vivian was looking at her son. Her throat moved. Caleb met her eyes across the table. He wanted to say something useful, but found he didn't have the words, which was unusual for him. He was generally good with words. He had talked frightened people through some of the worst moments of their lives in conditions that made this restaurant look like a dream. "He's a perceptive kid," Caleb said finally. "He is," Vivian said. Her voice was careful. "He mostly gets it from himself." It was such an honest thing to say, so undefended, that Caleb found himself reassessing her entirely. The waiters cleared the first course. Somewhere in the room, a conversation resumed, then another, and gradually the ambient noise of the restaurant returned, though it had a different texture now, a self-consciousness, a performance of not looking that required more effort than the looking had. Vivian and Caleb talked, not about business, not about Hartwell Group, or the investors sitting in the private room wondering what had happened to their host, or the journalists who were at this very moment filing notes about what they'd witnessed. They talked about small things. Caleb asked Noah what he was afraid of because Sophie had just confessed she was afraid of escalators, and Noah seemed to be working up to a reciprocal admission. Noah said he was afraid of the gap between the elevator and the floor. Sophie said that was a very specific fear. Noah said fears usually were. Vivian watched her son have a conversation with a 7-year-old, as though they had known each other for years, and felt something she did not immediately have a name for. Sophie told Vivian the extended version of her winning story, complete with footnotes. And somewhere in the middle of it, without either adult quite noticing, Vivian and Caleb began to talk to each other. Really talk. About what Sophie's confidence at 7 had cost Caleb in sleepless nights of making sure she always felt seen. About what Noah's quiet watchfulness had cost Vivian in the dawning uncomfortable suspicion that she had not done the same for him. "He doesn't have anyone who just sits with him," Vivian said. Not complaining. Stating it the way someone states a fact they've only recently allowed themselves to examine. "He has a schedule, activities, things to do at every hour, but no one who just sits." "Sophie's the opposite," Caleb said. "We don't have much, but we have time." "Is that enough?" He thought about it honestly. Some days it's the only thing. The truce broke without warning. At 8:47 p.m., the door to the private dining room opened, and Vivian's assistant Derek crossed the restaurant floor at a pace that was technically walking, but was functionally something else. He leaned down and spoke directly into Vivian's ear. Caleb watched her face. I had spent years reading faces in conditions of high stress, in field hospitals, in emergency rooms, in the back of ambulances, in moments when the difference between what a face showed and what a body was doing was information that could save a life. What he saw on Vivian Hart's face in the 3 seconds after her assistant spoke was not the careful executive composure she wore like a second skin. It was fear. Real fear. The kind that lives below strategy. She stood up too fast. Her hand caught the edge of the water glass. She reached for the table to steady herself, and her hand missed by an inch, and Caleb was already moving around the table, one hand at her elbow, the other at her back, before she had time to process what was happening. She didn't fall, but she would have. The room saw it. Everyone saw it. Phones were already up. Caleb lowered her back into the chair with the efficiency of someone who had done this in conditions infinitely more chaotic than a restaurant in the financial district. He checked her pupils, took her pulse at the wrist, assessed the color of her lips, the clamminess of her skin. "When did you last eat today?" he asked. His voice was calm, and even the kind of calm that was not performed but structural, built into him by years of practice. She blinked. "I don't remember." "Derek," Caleb said without looking up. The assistant startled. "Orange juice or anything with sugar. Now." Derek went. Sophie and Noah had gone very still. Sophie, who had seen her father move into this mode before, watched quietly. Noah was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. "She's all right," Caleb told Noah. "Steady, direct, no hedging. She just needs something to eat. Her blood sugar dropped. It happens." Noah's grip on the table loosened slightly. Derek returned with juice. Caleb pressed it into Vivian's hand and watched her drink it. After 90 seconds, the color was beginning to return to her face. "Better?" he asked. "Yes." She sounded both embarrassed and something else, something that was trying to understand what had just happened and who had made it stop. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You still need to eat dinner." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've done that before," she said. Not a question. "I was a combat medic," he said. "Then a field surgeon. Army. 2 tours. When I came back, I went through a residency, worked trauma for about 4 years. Emergency medicine." Vivian stared at him. "And now you repair electrical wiring. And deliver packages on Thursday nights." "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Sophie, who was now drawing something on a napkin for Noah. "My wife's name was Claire," he said. "She had a heart condition, one we knew about, one that was manageable. She went in for a routine procedure 2 years after I started my trauma rotation. I was supposed to be there." He stopped. "I wasn't. There was a multi-vehicle accident on the interstate, and we were the closest trauma center, and I made a call. I chose to stay." His voice remained level the way a structure remains level when everything inside it is under enormous pressure. "She didn't make it through the procedure. Not because I wasn't there, the surgeon told me that. The outcome wasn't about my presence. But I was not there." The restaurant moved around them, oblivious. "I decided after that I was not going to be a person who was not there," Caleb said. "Whatever I had to give up to make that true, I gave it up." Vivian said nothing for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was lower than it had been all evening. "I've been not there for 6 years, she said. "And I just now let a stranger's child talk me into sitting at this table." She looked at Noah, who was laughing at whatever Sophie had drawn. "What does that tell you?" "It tells me you're paying attention," Caleb said. "Finally." She looked at him sharply. He held her gaze without apology. That was direct, she said. You seem like someone who can handle direct. I can. I just don't usually get it. The video was already online by the time Derek showed Vivian his phone. Someone in the restaurant had captured the moment Vivian nearly went down, and the moment Caleb caught her. The clip was 47 seconds long. In the first 20, Vivian Hart looked unambiguously like a woman losing control of her body in public. In the last 27, an unidentified man in a faded shirt was calmly and competently taking charge of the situation. The most shared version was captioned, "Billionaire CEO Vivian Hart collapses at Lumiere restaurant." Sources say Hart has been increasingly erratic in recent months. The board had already seen it. Derek confirmed this with the expression of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Vivian read the message from the board chair. Her face was very still. Caleb was watching her. "They're going to use this," she said. "Yes," he said. "They are. Richard Kane has wanted me out of that company for 3 years. He's been looking for something he could point to." She set the phone face down on the table. "He just found it." "Maybe," Caleb said. He was looking at Derek. "What time did you receive the news about the board meeting, the exact time?" Derek checked his phone. 8:41. "And the first post of the video on social media?" Caleb searched briefly on his own phone. 8:39. He looked up. "The video was already circulating before your assistant came to tell you. Which means someone in this room sent it to a media contact before the board was even notified." Vivian went very still. "That's not a leak," Caleb said. "That's a sequence. Someone staged this. Someone knew you'd be here tonight. Someone knew what kind of news would cause that reaction in you. Someone arranged for both things to happen simultaneously and had a camera positioned to catch the result." He paused. "That's not opportunism. That's planning." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something nobody at the table expected. "I want you in that board meeting tomorrow morning." Caleb looked at her. "I realize I'm asking a man I met 2 hours ago in a restaurant, while nearly passing out, to walk into a room full of people trying to end my career and stand next to me." She folded her hands on the table. "I also think you are the only person I have spoken to in recent memory who told me the truth without wanting anything in return. And I think you figured out in approximately 4 minutes what my entire legal team has not figured out in 4 weeks." She paused. "So I'm asking." She looked at Derek. "Send Caleb the access credentials for my executive document archive tonight. He'll need to review the board files before 9 a.m. Derek nodded and made a note without blinking. He had learned over 4 years of working for Vivian Hart that her decisions arrived faster than most people's questions. Noah looked up from the bread roll construction project he and Sophie had been quietly engineering. He looked at Caleb, then at his mother, then back at Caleb. "You should say yes," Noah said with great certainty and returned to his work. Sophie nodded in agreement without looking up. Caleb looked at the 2 children, then at Vivian Hart, who was watching him with the expression of someone who had just made a decision they couldn't take back and wasn't sure they wanted to. "What time?" he said. 9 a.m. "I'll need a suit. Derek will bring one. He's approximately your size. He'll meet you in the lobby at 7:30. She said it the way she said everything operational, as though it were already done. Caleb looked at Derek, who gave a small, resigned nod that suggested this was not the strangest thing he had been asked to do. "Then yes," Caleb said. Caleb was home by 11. Sophie was already asleep, her nightlight making a soft yellow circle on the ceiling above her bed. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the way he always did, just to confirm the fact of her, the specific reality of her breathing in the dark, and then went to the kitchen table. Derek had sent the document access by the time Caleb sat down. He made coffee, opened his laptop, and began to read. He read the board correspondence, the internal memos. The corrected Rotterdam assessment buried 3 folders deep, superseded and unflagged, that showed the actual net cost of the error was less than half of what Kane had been citing. He read the personnel files for the communications consultancy that had twice been contracted by the COO's office. He read until 4 in the morning, made a second coffee, and then assembled what he had into a manila folder with a printed timeline, 3 screenshots, and a handwritten list of questions in his small, precise handwriting. At 6:15, he made Sophie's lunch. At 7, he woke her. At 7:15, he dropped her at school, watched her walk through the doors, and stood on the sidewalk for an extra 30 seconds, the way he always did, just to make sure. Then he went to meet Derek in a lobby that cost more per square foot than his apartment. The suit was charcoal gray, well-fitted, and belonged to Derek, who had surrendered it at 7:30 outside the Hartwell Group headquarters, with the quiet stoicism of a man who had learned not to ask follow-up questions. Caleb stood on the sidewalk for a moment, before going in, looking up at the building, the way he looked at things he needed to understand before he could work with them methodically, without sentiment. He went inside. The boardroom was on the 34th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a table long enough to seat 20, and the particular quality of light that expensive architecture uses to make people feel that decisions made here are inherently more significant than decisions made elsewhere. 11 board members, 3 external shareholders, 2 legal representatives, and Richard Kane seated at the far end of the table, who looked at Caleb the way people look at something they cannot immediately categorize and have therefore decided to dismiss. Vivian was already there when Caleb entered. She was standing at the head of the table, in a dark blazer, hair down, a deliberate softening of the image that the video had sharpened into something brittle. She looked composed. Only someone watching her hands would have noticed she was pressing her fingertips flat against the table hard, the way people do when they need something solid to push against. She met his eyes when he walked in. Something in her face settled. Caleb took the chair to her right and set the manila folder on the table. Richard Kane looked at the folder, then at Caleb, then at Vivian. "I wasn't aware we'd be including outside parties," Kane said. His voice carried the particular smoothness of a man who had spent decades saying unpleasant things pleasantly. "Mr. Moore is here as a special advisor," Vivian said. "That's within my executive authority. His area of expertise being—" Kane left the question open, which was its own kind of contempt. "Crisis assessment," Caleb said. He said it without volume, without performance. "And pattern recognition." Kane smiled in the way that isn't a smile. "Interesting credentials." "Let's begin," Vivian said. Kane opened with the video. He had it cued on the room's display screen, and he let it play twice the 47 seconds in which Vivian Hart lost her balance in a restaurant and had to be steadied by a stranger. He let the silence after it do the work that he was too careful to do himself. "What you're seeing," Kane said, "is a pattern documented over the past several months. Missed calls, delayed responses, a decision in the Rotterdam negotiation that cost us $12 million and was later attributed to, and I'm quoting the internal memo, an error in judgment consistent with cognitive overload." He set his hands on the table. "The board's position is that Ms. Hart is an exceptional executive who is currently not well. The appropriate response is not punitive. It is structural. A temporary transfer of operational authority while she recovers." "From what specifically?" Caleb said. Kane looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" You've cited a video of a medical episode and a negotiation error from 11 weeks ago. What is the diagnosis? What condition are you asserting she is recovering from? I'm not a physician. I am, Caleb said, quietly, without drama. Or was. Board-certified emergency medicine, with a subspecialty in trauma and a secondary certification in occupational stress physiology. So when you describe symptoms consistent with cognitive overload, I'd like to hear the medical basis for that characterization. The room was very quiet. What Vivian Hart experienced last night was a vasovagal response most likely triggered by hypoglycemia and acute psychological stress. It lasted less than 30 seconds. She was oriented lucid and fully recovered within 4 minutes. There was no loss of consciousness, no cognitive impairment, and no indication of an underlying condition of concern. He paused. That is a medical assessment. What you've offered is a video. Patricia Wheeler, one of the external shareholders, a woman in her 60s whose expression had been quietly skeptical since Kane began, leaned forward slightly. Kane shifted his approach. The Rotterdam decision was made at 11 p.m. on a day when Ms. Hart had been in consecutive meetings for 14 hours, following a transatlantic flight, Caleb said. The error was a miscalculation of a currency hedge identified and partially corrected within 72 hours, at a final net cost of 4.2 million, not 12. The 12 million figure appears in a preliminary memo superseded by a corrected assessment dated 3 days later. He turned a page. That document is in the board's records. It's simply not in the presentation you've prepared. The external shareholder to Kane's left was looking at the table in a way that meant he was looking at his phone beneath it. Kane's smile was getting thinner. The concerns about Ms. Hart's stability are not limited to last night or Rotterdam, Kane said. There is a pattern. There is a video, Caleb said. And I'd like to talk about that video. He removed the 3 screenshots from the folder and slid them to the center of the table. Each one was a still image from the footage with timestamps visible in the corner. The first share of this video on social media occurred at 8:39 p.m. last night. A message was sent to Ms. Hart's assistant, notifying her of the emergency board meeting at 8:41 p.m. The video was shared by an account with 600 followers that had never previously posted anything related to Hartwell Group or Vivian Hart. Caleb tapped the second screenshot. That account was created 11 days ago. The only other content it has shared are 2 posts, one promoting a financial newsletter, and one sharing a profile piece on Richard Kane's management philosophy, also published 11 days ago. The room held a different kind of silence now. The restaurant where last night's dinner took place was on Ms. Hart's confirmed schedule shared with her executive team, including the COO's office 14 days ago. The table arrangement, the investor guest list, the presence of media, all of it was known in advance. Caleb looked at Kane, not with anger, with the clean, impersonal focus of someone doing a job. Someone with access to that schedule and a motive to damage Ms. Hart's public standing, arranged for footage to exist, and arranged for it to reach media contacts before it reached her own team. That is not a leak. That is a campaign. Kane said, that is a remarkable accusation. I haven't finished, Caleb said. He placed the final page on the table. The account that first shared this video has a posting pattern consistent with managed distribution, the timing, the reach, the speed of amplification. That kind of performance doesn't happen organically from a 600-follower account. It requires either paid promotion or a coordinated network seeding the content simultaneously. Either way, it requires resources and advanced preparation. He closed the folder. I'd suggest the board's legal team examine the account's network connections and any communications between the COO's office and third-party reputation management firms before this meeting concludes. The evidence I have reviewed is sufficient to warrant that inquiry. What that inquiry finds will determine the rest." He said the last part carefully, not as a bluff, but as a perimeter. He had the documentation to support the inquiry. Whether the inquiry confirmed his conclusion was not something he needed to assert. He only needed the board to believe it was worth asking. Kane's expression did not change, but he stopped talking. Patricia Wheeler said, "Richard." One word. It landed like a door closing. Kane looked around the table. The table did not look back at him the way it had when he'd walked in. Chaptung. The meeting ended at 11:45 a.m. Richard Kane was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Two board members who had co-signed the motion to remove Vivian submitted formal retractions before noon. Patricia Wheeler and the external shareholders issued a brief statement reaffirming their confidence in Hartwell Group's current leadership. Vivian signed the paperwork in a conference room 3 floors below, with Derek hovering near the door. Caleb waited in the hallway. He had loosened Derek's tie by about an inch and was reading something on his phone. When she came out, she looked at him. "The call log," she said. "Did you have it?" "I had enough to make the inquiry unavoidable," he said. "The inquiry will find the rest." She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a short, surprised sound, like something that had escaped without permission. It was, Caleb thought, probably the most unguarded thing he'd seen her do. It transformed her face briefly into something that had nothing to do with Hartwell Group. "I'd like to offer you a position," she said. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about it since about 2 this morning." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Is there anything you don't notice?" He thought about Sophie's face at the school door that morning. "Not much," he said. She laid out the roll in her office with the city spread behind her through the window and 2 cups of coffee between them that neither of them touched. Director of Human Strategy and Family Wellness. A new position. Its mandate was to identify and dismantle the organizational patterns that had quietly and systematically produced what Vivian had spent 9 years producing in herself: extraordinary professional output at the cost of everything that made a person a person. "I want to change what it means to work here," Vivian said. "Not as a PR initiative, as a structural reality. I want parents to be able to leave at 3 o'clock to pick up their kids without it affecting their trajectory. I want the expectation of perpetual availability to stop being the entry fee for ambition." She paused. "I want to build something that would have been useful to me 6 years ago, and to you." "I have one condition," Caleb said. "I assumed you would. My schedule protects Sophie. Pick up at 3:15. Dinner at home by 6:30, minimum 4 nights a week. School events non-negotiable. If a meeting conflicts with any of that, the meeting moves." He looked at her steadily. "Not sometimes. Every time." Vivian nodded. "That's not just a condition I'll accept," she said. "It's the first policy of the new department." "Then yes," he said, for the second time in 12 hours. After the others had gone, Vivian and Caleb sat in the empty boardroom on the 34th floor. The city outside had shifted into early evening, the light going amber and long. Neither of them had planned to stay. It had simply happened. Derek had left, the legal team had left, and neither of them had stood up. "What are you most afraid of?" Caleb asked. Vivian looked at the table. "Not losing the company. I thought that was it for a long time. But last night, when Noah asked if I was going to disappear like his father..." She stopped. Started again. "I'm most afraid of him growing up and not being able to remember a single moment where I was just there. Not managing him. not providing for him, just there. She said it without looking for a response. Just said it the way you say something when you're done carrying it alone. What do you regret most? She asked. He didn't hesitate. The ordinary nights. Claire would make dinner and I'd still be at the hospital. Not because of an emergency, because I didn't want to leave in the middle of something. Because I thought there would be other nights. He looked at the window. You always think there will be other nights. The room held the silence easily. You saved my company today, Vivian said. You saved it, he said. You made the decisions. I just showed you what was already there. In the restaurant too, she said. You were already there. That's different from saving. He looked at her. She was looking back, not with the controlled assessment she'd worn all evening, but with something quieter and more open. The expression of someone who has decided to stop performing and see what happens next. They did not close the distance between them. It was not that kind of moment, not yet. Too new, too honest, too much still to be understood. But something was established in the quiet of that room that did not need words to become real. A recognition. The particular feeling of being seen by someone who is not trying to use what they see. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not simple because real things rarely are. Vivian learned slowly, imperfectly, with the discipline she usually reserved for quarterly strategy, how to be present. She started leaving the office at 6. She sat with Noah at dinner and put her phone face down on the counter, which was harder than restructuring a subsidiary, and she would admit that to anyone who asked. She asked Noah questions and listened to the full answers. She got things wrong and corrected them and got them wrong again. Noah began to trust the consistency of her presence. The way children trust things, not all at once, but in layers, each small kept promise building on the last. Caleb took on the new role with the same methodical care he brought to everything. He was good at it in ways that surprised even Vivian, not just the structural changes, but the conversations. His ability to sit across from a senior executive who was quietly drowning and say without judgment, "What is it costing you, and is it worth it?" That was not something that could be hired for. It had to be lived. Sophie and Noah became against all reasonable probability genuine friends. Sophie told Noah stories. Noah told Sophie about architecture, which he had apparently developed a strong interest in without telling anyone. Sophie declared that old buildings with feelings were basically the same thing as architecture. Noah considered this and decided she was right. On a Friday evening in November, Vivian made a reservation at Lumiere. She requested the main floor, not the private room. She asked for the table in the corner, the same table, the one under the smaller chandelier tucked away from the cameras, and the careful choreography of wealth. The four of them walked in together. Margaret Bell was there. She saw them from across the room, Vivian and the man who was no longer wearing a faded shirt. The two children who were already debating something with great seriousness, and her expression cycled through several things before settling on bewilderment. They sat down. Sophie reached immediately for the breadbasket. Noah told her the rolls were very buttery. Sophie said she knew. Vivian looked around the room at the chandeliers, at the white tablecloths, at the faces of people who had watched her make a decision they couldn't understand on a night that had changed everything, and felt none of the things she'd felt the last time she was here. Caleb was watching her. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She meant it completely. She reached over and took his hand from the table. Not dramatically. Just reached over and took it the way you take something that belongs to you. "This is my table of honor," she said. The room did not go silent the way it had before. People glanced over, looked away, returned to their conversations. The world did not stop turning. But at the corner table under the smaller chandelier in the restaurant where everything had begun, the four of them were simply and completely there. And that, in the end, was everything. There's something this story keeps coming back to, not the boardroom, not the money, not even the moment Vivian sat down at the wrong table. It's something quieter than all of that. It's the idea that being present is not passive. It's the hardest thing most of us will ever choose to do. Caleb gave up a career, a title, a version of himself that the world considered successful because he understood too late, and then completely, that the people who needed him most didn't need him to be impressive. They needed him to be there. And Vivian, who had built everything, had to have a 6-year-old boy stop walking in a restaurant to show her the one thing her $1 billion had never managed to build. We don't always get that moment. But if you're watching this, maybe you're paying attention to something. Maybe that's already a start. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll be back with another one, and we'll make it worth your time.